Hello, my name is Sarah Maslin, and I'm a software developer at Oracle working on the Oracle Content Management Headless samples. Today I'm going to show you how to build a minimal application in Vue using Oracle Content Management as a headless CMS. The sample is publicly available on GitHub, and this is the universal Vue minimal sample that's already hooked up to Oracle Content Management. This code on GitHub is available for you to contribute to and give feedback on. So let's clone this repository. You can use any editor or IDE of your choice to edit and run the sample. I use Visual Studio Code, so let's open up this project. Now, the first thing we're going to want to do is install all the dependencies. So open up a new terminal and run npm install. This can take some time. We originally created this project using the Vue command line interface tool, which is fully documented on their website. We're using Vue version 3, which added the support of server-side rendering, and their website contains full information on how you can add server-side rendering to your Vue 3 project created with Vue CLI. We are also using Vuex as a state management library. I'm not going to go into details of this in the demo, but the website contains full information. The Oracle Content Management documentation also contains full information on this sample, and we'll be covering what I am going through in this demo. So whilst this code's installing, let's just have a look at the basic structure. Under source, we have our main project code, and I'll be coming back to that in a moment. The package.json is a standard Node.js file. It contains the list of dependencies for your project, along with the scripts that you're going to use to build and run your application. Vue config.js contains any additional things you're going to need for bundling and building your application. The .env file is where we're specifying the server URL and the token of the channel in which the assets for this sample are published. It is considered best practice to use an env file to contain sensitive data for your application and not to check it into your source control system. Therefore, when you use this sample for your own purposes, you're most likely to want to take this file out of your source control. So we'll just wait for these dependencies to finish installing. The dependencies have all been installed, so we now want to build it. The build will fail if there are any lint errors, so let's run the linter, but add the fix on the end, so any lint errors will automatically be fixed if possible. Perfect. Now run npm run build. This will create a dist directory, and we'll first build the client library and then move on to building the server library. So let's just wait for that to build. You can see here we have the dist directory containing the built client, and it's now building the server side. Excellent, everything's now built, and under dist you'll be able to see that we have both client and server. So let's go ahead and run our application using Npm Run Start. And this will fire up our local server and tell us what port and URL the server's running at, and you can see it here. So let's open this in a browser, and you'll see that the application loads. Our application contains a header, which contains some logo and some links, some content, and then a footer here at the bottom with some static assets. All this data is coming from the server apart from these static images on the right-hand side. We have asset types defined in content server that are used to feed this sample. We have a minimal main asset type, and this is the main asset describing the site's layout. It defines the header and it defines the footer, and then it can have a number of pages that will be displayed in between the header and footer. The number of display pages will be displayed up here. So at present, we have 2 pages, home and contact. If you add more pages to this minimal main asset, they will appear here as extra links. The minimal page asset type defines the contents of this page, and it is built up of several sections, which are defined by minimal section asset types. And you can see this home has 2 sections, this one at the top and then welcome page at the bottom. If we go to contact us, you'll see that we have 3 sections, this want to learn more, the connect with us, and the locations. So if we look at the code on what's driving this, let's first look at the scripts folder. So the server config utils file is where we are using using the Oracle Content SDK. Oracle Content Management makes available a Content SDK for anyone who wants to build a headless application in a framework such as Vue, Angular, and React. And you can see here we're pulling out some functions from this Content SDK. At the bottom, we are creating a client for this Content SDK. In services, it contains all the functions using that Content SDK to pull out the data for this sample. Let me highlight a few methods. So the get item function, it takes a slug and calls the Content SDK client to get the item with that given slug, and it returns that item. We use this in the fetch OCE minimal main. This is the main entry point for rendering that very first screen. And you can see that we get an item with a slug name of minimal main, and this will return us the header and the footer information. And it will also return us all the pages that we want to display. For a particular page, we take its page slug and we call get items again with the name of that slug in order to get all the information for that page. We also get rendition URLs for the logos and some images. And again, that calls through to the Content SDK using the client that we've created previously, calling get item again for that given ID. The only other thing under scripts is a utils file containing some utility functions. The Vuex folder contains the Vuex library code. And in here, this is where it calls through to the code in script services to get all the data from the Content SDK and store it in the Vuex server. It then makes available that data to any of our components. Under router, we have our router definition that's used both in client-side and server-side rendering. And you can see here we have 3 routes. The first is the home page, and it's rendered by the page component. The second is a page route, and it also renders for the page component. What this application will do, when you go to the home page, we will get the first page that's been defined for your minimal main asset, and then it will redirect to that page, and that's the home page. If the path or the page has not been found, then you'll see just a standard page not found screen. We've defined our components into 2 folders. The pages folder is where we have the main entry points, like your page. So these are where you have your routes. And then under components, we have components that are reusable. So you'll see in page, at the top, we have the markup. And you can see we display the section using the section component. You can see in created, we get the slug that's come off the URL. And if we don't have that slug, like there's nothing on the URL, we get the first page from the data from the minimal main, and we redirect to that route. This component makes use of computer properties. So it will pull data from the Vuex store for this particular page. When this variable updates, our UI will automatically update. So when the data is obtained from the server, our UI will automatically update. The server prefetch method is called when it's rendering on the server, and this basically calls through to the local fetch data method. The fetch data method dispatches a call to the Vuex server, so asking for it to get the data for this particular page. When we render this page on the client, we make sure that we've got the data. And if it's not there already, we ought to ask Vuex to get it again. So if I look at a reusable component, for example, the footer, you can see here that we're rendering the markup. You can see we're rendering these static assets, and this component does nothing else. It's just a pure rendering component with all the data passed in. The header is the same. We are rendering the header footer header component, and all the data is passed into this component. You can see we have additional methods that just simply change the UI for which page is currently selected. So the currently selected page will be slightly highlighted a different color. And if the screen's made smaller, it changes to a drop-down list. The section code component is similar. So we have the markup here at the top using data that's passed into us, but it also does a couple of additional calls to the Vuex store to get the URLs for things that are needed to be rendered within that section. And you can see here in fetch data, this is where it gets it. It does a dispatch call to the Vuex server, asking it to run the get renditions URL method. When that data is returned, it's stored in our computed variables, which will then automatically update the UI. The remaining folders in this project is the client and server folders. This is the entry points for the client and the server, respectively. So let's look at the server file. When you make a request to your application, the server Vue server will go away and determine what components are needed to render that route. It then asks those components for the data that is needed for those routes, and it stores it in the Vuex store. It then renders all of that content out in serialized form from the Vuex store, along with the components markup into a HTML document that's then sent to the client. The client then takes that markup, it gets out of the markup the serialized Vuex store data and initializes its own client-side Vuex store and puts the data in it. And it then renders that markup that is received. It adds in any other client-side JavaScript, such as on-click buttons. If there was no server-side HTML content, it will go and request that content from Vue. Like I said earlier, our documentation contains information about this sample that I've just gone through and explains it, how the data is created and how to run the application. We also have a number of other samples written in other frameworks. For example, we have a Vue blog, we have a React blog, we have an image gallery written in both React and Vue. So please take a look at this website to see all the other tutorials that we have for you. I hope you've enjoyed this video and thank you very much for watching.